Don't make your first fiberglass job too big, because the larger they are, the more skills and experience you need, and the more likelihood there is that you can run into problems. So if you're new to fiberglassing, although you tend to get inspired by wanting to make some particular piece, give yourself a chance to learn and start on something fairly simple and basic that doesn't really matter. So find something in your garage like a plastic flower pot or something that you can just make a fiberglass mould of, and then if that works out okay, make a copy of it and see the techniques and get a bit of learning. But beware of starting on a job that's too big and too complicated, because you'll get into problems, you'll get frustrated, and you'll say fiberglassing's too hard. And it isn't really. You just need to gain experience the more complex the jobs are that you can do as time goes along. There are basically two types of fiberglass cloth. Woven, which has a cross-checking pattern to it and the threads are woven together. And chop strand mat, where it's just short hairs that are all put together in manufacture, and you can tear it and it breaks up quite easily. Each has their suitability, and each has jobs where they're not the best product to use. And in car work, generally speaking, woven cloth is not what you want. This stuff is designed for flat surfaces like surfboards and the sides of boats. It doesn't take up compound curves well. So what happens is you get a bunching where it's going around the job. Common reason why guys start working on fiberglass on cars with woven cloth is because they've just gone to their hardware shop and bought a fiberglass repair kit. And they rarely have chop strand mat in them. They nearly always have woven cloth in them because those kits are designed for boaties and surfboard repairers. And so they start using this. The other thing that's wrong with this is it's not thick enough. You've got to put on multiple layers to get a thickness that's strong enough for the riggers of going on a car, particularly on a race car. So to get woven cloth, I almost never use this stuff. Chop strand mat, that's the way to go. There's two grades of it. I always start my jobs with a layer of the light 225 grams, which is fairly thin, but it takes up all the shape of your job really well. And then I'll put on two layers of this stuff, which is 450 chop strand mat, or CSM as it's called in the industry, and that gives you the strength that you need. With one layer of 225, two layers of 450, you get a 3mm thickness. And most car racing rules, that's the thinnest that you can make it, but it gives you a panel that's strong enough. So throw away your woven cloth and get chop strand mat. Trust me, you'll love it once you start using it. It just breaks up and conforms to the shape of the tightest, curviest job. There's really only three problems you can have with catalyst and the ratio of catalyst to resin. Your job goes off too fast, so you mix your resin up before you can get finished. The resin's gone off. The opposite can happen. You put too little resin in and you mix it up, you lay the job off, and the next day you come out and it still hasn't locked off. The other thing that can happen is your resin can go off too quickly or too slowly because of the ambient air temperature. If it's hot weather, catalyst works faster and gives you less time to work. And if it's cold, the opposite can happen, where your job won't go off for a long time and you start to worry about whether it ever will. So the way to avoid those problems as far as air temperature is concerned is if it's warm weather and you've got no choice but to lay fiberglass in that sort of weather just because of the climate that you're in, use the minimum amount of catalyst, which is 1%. If you're in a cold area and it's snowing outside and you've got no alternative but to lay up fiberglass in really cold weather, then do the opposite. Add the maximum catalyst that you can, which is 2%. How do you add catalyst exactly? Well, if you've seen me doing fiberglass work, I just squirt it in because I've been doing it for so long, I can pretty well guess it fairly close. But to get it exact in jobs where it really matters, particularly when you're starting out, do it by weight. 1% catalyst to 2% catalyst by weight. Sneak into the kitchen, steal your wife's kitchen scales. For God's sake, put them in a plastic bag so you don't get hairy crap all over them, and do it by weight. Put your resin on top and do it by weight. That way you will get it exactly the right ratio every time. The other issue that can arise with catalyst ratios is where you're doing a really big job and you put your catalyst in by weight, mix it up, you start laying, and you get about 3/4 through the job and your resin goes off before you can finish it. There's two ways you can overcome that problem with a big job. One is to not mix giant amounts of resin. I normally don't mix more than about 2 litres of resin in a go. I can put that on and then mix the next batch up and keep going. So I wouldn't, if I was going to do a job that took 10 litres of resin, there is no way I would mix 10 litres of resin, catalyse it, and then try and apply it, because by the time you get halfway through it, the resin will have gone off. The other thing that you can do when you've got a big job is to use the minimum amount of resin, and that's 1%. And at times when I've got a big job and I want to do it fairly smoothly, I will wait for cool weather, or I will do the layup at night when the temperatures are lowest, and that way my job doesn't catalyse and get away from me before I can do all the detail on a big job. There's two common mistakes that I see where guys are making problems for themselves by applying the cloth, the fiberglass cloth, incorrectly. The first one is to get the cloth and to brush the resin onto it on a table and then bring the wet cloth onto the job. You'll see this all the time in custom car garage, and it's wrong. You don't bring the wet cloth onto the job. There are 1 or 2 occasions where you might, but generally speaking, you apply the resin to the job, bring the dry cloth in, put the cloth on, and then apply your resin with the brush, not the other way around. Another mistake that I commonly see guys doing in hand laying up with fiberglass is they'll use little bits. So they'll put a bit there and a bit there, a bit there and a bit there, and then they'll overlap it there. The reason this is wrong is it's not cost effective, is because you've got all these unnecessary overlaps in your work, and also the thickness of your job is going all over the place. This is usually a sign that you've bought a fiberglass repair kit. Beware. They're made for guys wanting to do car repairs who could do a lot better with their material supply, and primarily boaties and surfboard repairs, where you just need small amounts of woven cloth. So if you're using small bits of cloth because that's all you can get, or you've used a fiberglass repair kit, what you need to do is you need instead to go to a fiberglass material supplier where you can either buy a whole roll or buy it by the metre off the roll. It's not that expensive when you buy it by the metre, and I usually take a rough measure in the days before I just bought whole rolls, and add about an extra metre to make sure that you don't run out on the job. That way you get one piece of cloth that will go over the whole job, and you can pre-cut it before you start laying. So where it's not going to fold properly, you can cut it with your scissors. And you'll notice that in my videos, you'll see me bringing in large pieces of cloth with cuts in them and plonking it down. Now, it might take, on a job like this, it might take 2 pieces of fiberglass to do it, and a couple of little bits where there's gaps around the edge. But I won't do the whole job with a whole lot of little pieces. That's dumb. And like I say, if you're using fiberglass repair kits, you need instead to Google fiberglass supplies in your area and find a better supply shop. Alligatoring is the term used to describe when you get a undesired wrinkly finish in your fiberglass, sort of like on an orange peel surface. You don't get it on the whole job, you just get it in places. The cause of alligatoring is generally that your gel coat was too thin. And what happens is when you apply the poly resin with the cloth over the top of your gel coat, the resin, as you know, gets quite warm as it goes off, and it will buckle that gel coat under that heat. So your gel coat needs to be thick to withstand that. There's two cures for that. If you're doing hand layer, you're either using spray gel coat and perhaps with a brush. If that's the case, just use spray gel coat with the brush and put 2 layers on. Put 1 layer on, let it tack, and then brush on another layer. That will give you the thickness to stop alligatoring with spray gel coat. It's very easy to get alligatoring even when you use brush on gel coat. And all brush on gel coat is spray gel coat that's had Q cells or fumed silica added to it by the manufacturer. Spray gel coat is cheaper, and so what I do is I buy spray gel coat and I mix it up myself. I add either Q cells or fumed silica. They're powdery products that you can buy from a commercial fiberglass supplier. Can't find one, just Google that in your area. You mix the powder in with a wire whisk on a cordless drill. You've got to mix it in really well. And I go for the consistency of about like mayonnaise. When my brush will stand up in the can, I know my gel coat is thick enough. So making that gel coat sometimes and quite often thicker than what the manufacturers make it, avoids the problem of alligatoring. Thick gel coat. It's also easy when you're brushing on gel coat to get little bald spots in your job because of the shape of it. And that's where you usually get your alligatoring. The guideline is for me is when you put your gel coat on your mould and you stand back and look at it, it should be opaque. You shouldn't be able to see through it. You lay your job up in your mould and then you can't get it apart. There's generally 2 reasons for this. One is maybe the shape of your object is such that you've got more than 180 degrees or you've got overlocking edges, and what's happened is you've laid the fiberglass over a shape where it physically can't release off it. The solution to that is to look at a job before you make a mould of it, look at it carefully and see if you need to split the mould and make it a 2-piece mould so that the mould halves will come off the job and release it. The other more common reason why fiberglass jobs don't release from moulds is because the moulds were not prepared properly for release. There's 2 steps you need to do to get the best release from a mould. And I've learnt this over 30, 40 years of fiberglassing. Other different techniques that people recommend, trust me, this is what works best. First is a coat of release wax. You don't have to use the expensive stuff you buy from fiberglass shops. If you can find lino floor polish in your hardware shop, that's good. Now, the experts will tell you that you have to put 7 to 10 coats of wax on, polish it, wax on, wax off. That's a load of rubbish. What happens is when you put the wax on and then you apply the gel coat heats the wax up and actually melts it. So you only need 1 coat of wax. You're not trying to get a gloss surface. You're trying to make sure that the job will release. Now, you don't need to polish and shine it. You just put on 1 coat of good quality wax, put it on thick, and do not polish it. The second step after that is PVA release. This is like a paint on film. Comes with various tinted colours in it so you can see it when you're working, or it comes in clear if you're working with carbon fibre and don't want to discolour the surface. But after the wax, you paint that on, you let it dry. If you use those 2 products, wax and PVA release, you will not have problems for a chemical reason for your job not releasing from the mould. You've sculpted your dial plug. You fiberglassed over the top of it to make a mould, but when you try to separate the two, your fillers stick to the fiberglass, and you've got to go around and clean off all the plaster and carved body filler that you've used to fill in the little imperfections. Nightmare job. The reason that's happening is because you haven't sealed your dial plug properly. And let me say straight up, that 2-pack automotive paint will not seal a die or plug against fiberglass resins. What you have to use is a 2-pack equal part polyurethane resin. In Australia, Wattle 7008 is the way to go. Bunnings don't sell it, but Mitre 10 do. The American equivalent is Famo Wood Glaze Coat. But any product which is a 2-pack equal parts polyurethane resin will do. You'll find this quite often sold in hardware shops as table gloss. That's what you've got to seal your die with. And my experience is nothing works better than this stuff, and nothing is worse than having to go over your fiberglass work and pick all the carbog and fillers off it. To avoid that problem, seal your die properly. If you want to lay up fiberglass onto plastic, like say a car bumper bar or sheet metal, you're not going to have success. You'll get initial adhesion, but particularly if it's going to be a permanent part on the car, the vibration is just going to cause the bond to break on either of those surfaces. What you need to do is, instead of using poly resin for your layup in a job like that, when you're laying onto plastic or onto sheet metal, which is smooth and usually painted, you need to use 2-pack epoxy resin like you use with Kevlar and carbon fibre. That way you'll get reasonable adhesion. The other thing I do when I'm working with those surfaces in fiberglass is, where I can, I drill holes into the surface so that the resin can go through it and lock it. But they are always too difficult surfaces to work with in conjunction with fiberglass.